Kyle Lewis has reportedly been traded to the Diamondbacks. Our thoughts on the deal coming up. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is, once again, Thursday, November 17th, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for an emergency episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. Per ESPN's Jeff Passan, the Mariners have agreed to trade 2020 AL Rookie of the Year Kyle Lewis to the Arizona Diamondbacks for utility man Cooper Hummel. Let's get straight into the deal. What do you think about it, Colby?
Yeah, it's a trade that I would classify as inevitable, I think is probably the best way. Obviously, we didn't know who it would be for, but I think we all kind of were working under the assumption that Kyle Lewis had very likely played his last game with the Mariners. That was amplified when he wasn't added to the playoff roster. He wasn't, he never got called back up after they sent him down for the final time. We had heard there were some hurt feelings, some fracturing of the relationship that dated back to, last offseason. And we had also heard that the knee was essentially done. So you just kind of add up
is
bone
what
on bone,
we were
right?
told. Yeah.
Right. So you just kind of add that all up, and Kyle Lewis seems like a guy who's destined to DH for his entire career and maybe give you 40 games in the outfield if you're really lucky. And that's not counting if he re-injures it yet again. So it's a bummer that Kyle Lewis is no longer in the organization. Seemed like a great dude. I know his teammates really liked him. And there's legitimate, bat skills there. I think he's going to be at least an solid average major league hitter. So even with the knee, but he's such a limited player now because of the injuries. And obviously when you pile on top of that, the fractured relationship, it seemed inevitable that Kyle Lewis would get traded. And now the only real surprise here is what came back to Seattle.
Yeah. And it really doesn't surprise me that this is the kind of return that the Mariners got for Kyle Lewis, that they basically got a fringe major leaguer, because that's unfortunately what Kyle Lewis has become himself. He's been a fringe major leaguer, and it's really just because he unfortunately cannot stay healthy, and most of that is really just not his fault, but that's just the reality of it. This year he finally comes back from the knee injury, gets concussed 5 games back, and misses more time. And when he was ready to start his rehab assignment, we heard Scott Service say, he's going to get time in the outfield, but then you look at the game logs and he's just DHing. And like he maybe played outfield just for a handful of games in the minor leagues overall, and that didn't fit within the construction of the Mariners major league roster, so there just wasn't really a place for him. And then when he finally came back up for a time there in the late summer, he did not look major league quality. And then when he went back down to the minor leagues, he had an awful month of September. So he wasn't even challenging really for the major league roster. He wasn't challenging for the playoff roster. So you add all those things in, and it was just a recipe for this to happen. The writing was on the wall here.
Yep.
This deal, like the only thing that surprised me was that it just happened out of the blue tonight. All of a sudden, that was the only surprise. The rest of it, the return, the fact that it's happened, the fact that Lewis is no longer a Seattle Mariner is not surprising at all. No. So, because it's just, these are the things that we have continued to hear for the last year or so about that rift between him and the organization, how he kind of, I was told at one point that he had basically been doing his own rehab, and that rubbed the Mariners the wrong way. They wanted to, have some say in that and how that process went, and there was no mutual ground there between player and team. And so these things happen, and it's such a bummer, man, because like I really enjoyed watching Kyle Lewis play when he first came up there at the end of 2019, and he went on that absolute tear. And then the first half of the 2020 COVID season, that first game when he goes yard off of Justin Verlander, like, you really thought that maybe the Mariners finally struck gold here, because this is before Julio, this is before Kelenic, this is before all that stuff. And it's just Kyle Lewis was really one of the first examples of Dipoto and company's rebuild working, right? And the process that they were going through with all of that. And it's just during that 2020 season, I named him, I nicknamed him the plan, right? Like Joel Embiid being the process. And because I thought like, hey, like that's like the first signal, like it's working, the plan is working, like Kyle Lewis actually is good, like they've developed this guy, and they've gotten him back on track after his first knee injury. And it just seemed like there was such a hopeful future for him in Seattle, and it sucks the way that it ended. But I wish nothing but the best for him in Arizona. He's got a great opportunity to succeed now. There isn't much of a logjam there that's keeping him from playing. I think he's probably mostly going to be a DH down there, and we'll see how much he's able to play in the outfield, if at all. But that's going to be one that I keep a close eye on this year. So we're going to talk about what the Mariners are getting in return with Cooper Hummel in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by SimpliSafe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Mariners listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Here's why I love it. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. SimpliSafe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. 24/7 professional monitoring service costs less than $1 per day. That's less than half the price of ADT's traditional professionally installed system. With the top-rated SimpliSafe app, stay in complete control of your system anytime, anywhere, arm or disarm, unlock for a guest, access your cameras, or adjust system settings. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen after the Kyle Lewis trade. So let's talk about what the Mariners got in return for Lewis. Super utility man, Cooper Hummel, who has absolutely raked at every level of the minor leagues, came up this year as a 27-year-old rookie, really struggled. 31% K rate. He was worth -0.8 F4 in 201 plate appearances. But, Colby, I'm hearing some good things from our colleague, Lindsey Crosby, over at Locked On MLB Prospects, that there's actually some hope for Hummel to be a useful super utility guy off the bench. He can catch. He can play pretty much every other position on the field, including all the positions on the infield. He's got a plus arm, plus speed, and strikeouts really haven't been the issue for him in the past. It was just an issue for him at the major league level this year. And 201 plate appearances is a small sample size. So it doesn't seem like the Mariners traded Kyle Lewis here for just nothing. Hummel seems pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing I did when I saw the trade was look up who Cooper Hummel was. And you see the initial numbers and you go, wow, like this is just a get what you can and move on type of trade. But when you start to look at, when I started to look at a little deeper at the numbers, including the minor league numbers, I saw a guy who walks a ton. We're talking 15 to 20% walk rates. A guy who struck out some, but never as much as he did in the major league level. It wasn't an issue. So that seems like it's possible he was just overwhelmed, but it also seems like maybe that's just an outlier here. And then you go to his baseball savant page and you see like 93rd percentile in arm strength, and you see like 88th percentile in sprint speed. And you kind of look at what the numbers tell you if you look at the minor league numbers at least, and you say, hey, this guy's pretty good, and oh, he's a catcher, and oh, he's apparently pretty fast for a catcher. And you look at it and you say, oh well, he's also a switch hitter, and he had some legitimate power going for him, lots of doubles, and obviously he runs well. And you kind of start to piece that together, and then you read some of the reports from people who know, people um, who have followed Hummel for a while now, and they're pretty much saying the same thing that the stats tell you. So we'll see. The overwhelming odds are is that he's, just in AAA and he's depth. I think that's what's most likely to happen. But again, this is a guy who can handle the outfield. He can handle catching. He's a switch hitter. He's got a lot of CTZ qualities, particularly in the walk rate. He has hit the ball hard in the minor league level. There's a lot of interesting breadcrumbs that I think probably stops you from just saying, Lewis, they gave him they're just trying to
Yeah.
get something for him. But I think it's fair if you want to say that Hummel is a 4A player. I think that's totally within the realm of possibility. But there is enough here to be intrigued and to wonder, can the Mariners get something out of this guy? And they've done it before. They did it with Sam Haggerty. They've done it with Dylan Moore. They did it with Austin Nola. So the Mariners have had some success turning these type of guys into quality big leaguers, and we'll see if they can do it again. But if you're going to try and do it, then you probably should try to do it with athletes. And it sounds to me like Cooper Hummel is a pretty darn good athlete.
And when the Mariners add guys like this, you have to pay at least a modicum of attention to it. And for me, the switch hitting aspect is really interesting. Now, I got to look a little deeper into the numbers and everything because we are recording this literally like 15 minutes after Passan reported it, and I didn't even know that Cooper Hummel was a human being until 15 minutes ago. So I'm catching up on all of this, but it's really interesting. And if anything, it gives them a little more catching depth with maybe a little more upside than someone like Brian O'Keefe, who's still on the roster at the moment, on the 40-man roster at the moment. I also kind of wonder if maybe this puts Luis Torrens in jeopardy again of being DFA'd, if they actually think that Hummel is a viable catching option for them. But the ability to play pretty much any position, that's going to have some value. At the very least, it's good 40-man depth because you are going to have injuries. We saw this year. We saw the types of players that came through, especially earlier on in the year. Hummel seems like a guy that he can at least provide value defensively and potentially on the base pass. Because, again, reports are plus speed. If you can have that guy coming off the bench, when you got maybe Dylan Moore on the IL or someone like that, that seems like you might actually be able to get something out of that. I don't know how much you're going to be able to get out of the bat, but Jerry DiPoto loves his minor league performers, and sometimes that's worked out for him. And this guy, listen to these WRC pluses down in the minor leagues: 117, 136, 147, 155, 148, 138. He rakes. And so maybe there's something in there. Maybe it's a swing change. Who knows? That can unlock that kind of success. Well, maybe not that kind of success, but some of the success that he found down in the minors, and let that translate to the majors. So he's an interesting guy. We'll be keeping an eye on him as we build up to the regular season. So I want to talk more about Lewis and kind of just, where this leaves the Mariners, what's next, all that stuff. in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. So, Colby, I don't think this is the last time we see the Mariners make a trade like this offseason, where they're more so, selling off pieces from the 40-man roster for, pieces like, we just talked about how Hummel is interesting, but certainly not something that you're going to get excited about. I think we're going to see more of these trades where they trade guys from the 40-man for guys that are not really that, exciting. Maybe interesting, but not that exciting. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would say so. It's the Mariners are kind of in a spot right now too, where they might sacrifice a little bit of talent for fit, right? They're no longer in the era of their rebuild or their build now, I guess, since they've kind of finished it. Where they're worried about just get as much talent as we can. It has to fit, right? The puzzle pieces have to fit now. And a guy like Hummel does fit this 40-man roster better than a guy like Kyle Lewis. And you start looking at other guys who are on the 40-man who might, suffer quote unquote similar fates. Taylor Trammell, Jared Kelnick, Justice Sheffield. Yeah. So there's quite a few guys. So it's about fit. It's about taking shots with the back end of your 40-man, and that's what the Mariners are going to do. And so I do think that this isn't the last time we'll see a prominent name for Mariners fans traded for somebody who is pretty much unknown. I think we're probably going to see it at least one more time. It just it's part of baseball, and it's part of what good teams do. Sometimes good teams make trades where they trade a recognizable name for depth, and people go, what? And then, well, look at that. Tom Murphy got hurt again. Luis Torrens is got DFA'd or whatever. And well, we could call up, Brian O'Keefe, but hey, we have Hummel, and Hummel's got upside, so let's give him a shot. And then Hummel pops, and all of a sudden, look, we have the switch hitting catcher now. So yeah, I think we're going to see more trades like this. I don't think it's going to be a ton of them. I think maybe one or two more, but we are going to see some smaller trade like this. And the Mariners are going to continue to shuffle the back end of their 40-man roster. And that is unfortunately what Kyle Lewis is to the Mariners right now. He's back into the 40-man roster type of guy. So we'll see more deals like this. And honestly, they're kind of fun. You get past being bummed, that it didn't work out with Kyle Lewis. Hummel's kind of a fun prospect to think about and to kind of, I don't want to say dream on, but like I think
he's not a waste of a 40-man spot.
No, he's a solid. If he's your third catcher, you're in a good spot. You're in a pretty good spot. So, and that's exactly what he is right now for the Mariners. Maybe even fourth. We'll see what they do with Luis Torrens, who could be a 40-man trade for another 40-man guy. So, I think it's interesting. I don't think, just to answer this question, which I'm sure is coming, I don't think this means that the Mariners are going to all of a sudden be a lot more open to trading somebody like Tom Murphy. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think this is just about, let's get a third catcher who has some upside, but also some athleticism. So maybe we can carry three catchers, but one of them is actually an outfielder. They did that in the past with Narvaez, Murphy, and Nola, right? And so,
well, that's what I was going to say. I wasn't going to ask about Murphy because I think it's they use him like they use Austin Nola, and that's what you kind of hope that he is, right? And it's kind of hard not to make that comparison when you hear what he can do, and you just hear that profile. So probably more speed than Nola, maybe a little bit better defensively, just at more spots, but. Like it's hard not to make that comp, and I was a pretty big Austin Nola fan, so that makes me happy to hear those kinds of reports on him. And so if they have that kind of player, I mean that's a massive, massive win for the Mariners. But that's just that's kind of dreaming here. But yeah, I don't think that this says really anything about Tom Murphy. Maybe Luis Torrens, but I could also see them, carrying the 4 catchers on the 40-man. You can't have enough catching depth. If you have like 4 actual legitimate major league catchers on your 40-man roster, you're in a good spot. You're in a really good spot. So, yeah, that's totally fine by me. Now, before we hop off of here, because you're losing daylight and you really need to buy a ring light, but let's bully Colby in the chat to get him to buy a ring light. I don't actually condone bullying. That's a joke. That's a joke.
To be fair, we often only record at like noon.
Yeah.
So lighting is never an issue.
Well, and that's an example of too much lighting right there.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. I want to ask you, which was the better catch? Robbing Ramon Laureano of a grand slam, or that catch he had in talking about Kyle Lewis, that catch he had in LA?
I think the catch in LA. He had a little less time to get there than the one in Laureano. Laureano, he was kind of able to chop his feet and jump, and he timed it perfectly. It was a great catch, don't get me wrong. But the one in LA, he kind of like jumped to the side and up, and he stuck his glove out, and I just think that one was a little better. And what's interesting about those 2 catches too, though, is that they both have great reaction, like GIFs built around them.
Yeah.
The LA one has Kike with a reaction, and then obviously the Ramon Laureano slam catch has the galloping of Kyle Lewis running in, smile on his face. So those are 2 great catches. Those are probably, I would say, those 2 catches and the home run off of Verlander, probably the first things that come to mind when you think of Kyle Lewis.
Yeah.
And if those are the top 3 highlights, when you've only played like 110 games for a team, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And obviously, I guess the big highlight would be winning Rookie of the Year, right? But when I think of Kyle Lewis, I certainly think of those 2 catches, but I probably think of that Dodgers catch first. I think it was just a little bit better. Yeah,
the Dodgers catch is pretty remarkable, and like you said, the Kike reaction afterwards is priceless. The one against the A's is great too, and especially considering the moment and what that, I mean, they ended up losing that game anyway because that was the Jimmy Yacobonis game. And I really don't want to remember that. I really did not want to remember the Jimmy Yacobonis game or Jimmy Yacobonis himself today, but alas, here we are. But yeah, that was a great catch, especially, with the smoke and everything. That was a wild looking game.
Mariners were still in the playoff hunt.
They were still in the playoff hunt. Yeah, that's what I was saying in terms of what that meant, because that was a massive game for them, and they started Jimmy Yacobonis in it. Anyway,
they got smoked. I believe the final score was 9-0.
They got literally smoked. Yeah. So
yes, the smoke was not from wildfires. It was from the Mariners' playoff chances going up in flames.
Yeah. Well, on that note, that's gonna do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on an emergency episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez. That's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11. That's EPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, featuring the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.